Thanks for staying with us here on News Talk. I'm Mike Kaninen for Bruce on this Wednesday. Yesterday, we talked with Lad Everett of the Coalition Against Gun Violence about the renewed push for gun control following the Charleston church shooting. Today, we're getting a different perspective. We're joined by Erich Pratt from Gun Owners of America, and we welcome your calls, your questions, and your comments. Call us during our live show at 10 a.m., 703-387-1020. Again, 703-387-1020 during our live broadcast here at 10 a.m. Welcome to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I wanted to ask you the same question I started with yesterday. What is your take on the initial reaction to this horrific tragedy? The focus on the issue of race, the issue of whether this was a hate crime, and the debate over the Confederate flag, and really not a lot of conversation about the issue of guns and gun control.
Well, our hearts certainly hurt for the victims and their families in South Carolina. And I think the aspect that we resent is the president using this opportunity to make this an issue about gun control and trying to further restrict the rights of law-abiding Americans, essentially punishing good people for what one creep did wrong with a firearm. And you know, over and over and over we see again, whether it's in this country or in other countries, that gun control has been a big failure, and yet here he wants to keep at it and continue more. But in other countries we've seen where they even have far stricter gun control laws than we do, they still haven't stopped their mass shootings. England's had mass shootings, France, Germany, Norway, India have had horrendous mass shootings where more people have died. The way that you stop this, and this is what the police say in this country, almost 90% of police say the way that you halt these mass shootings in their tracks is by law-abiding citizens being able to protect themselves. Sadly, that wasn't the case in South Carolina by law and by policy, but the police say that, you know, really they're the ones who are the first responders. It's the potential victims. You know, we like to call the police and the firefighters first responders. They're actually second responders. The potential victims at the scene of the crime are really the first responders to take matters of self-defense into their own hands.
Let's follow that argument, because this was a place of worship. People go to places of worship on the weekend, synagogues, churches, mosques, to reflect, to meditate, to decompress in our very busy, chaotic world. And the idea of wearing a weapon into a place of worship, or even having an armed guard in a place of worship, I think for many people, many Americans, even lovers of guns and advocates of the Second Amendment, that is not something that they're comfortable with.
The shooter chose this church because it wasn't guarded, because it didn't have security. He actually told a friend beforehand he was considering a college in Charleston, decided not to because he was concerned about the security there. So he picked what they like to call a soft target. And that's the tragic aspect of this, is that the people weren't able to protect themselves. You look around the country, there have actually been churches where people have stopped mass shootings in their tracks. New Year's Eve in Florida, it was a pastor who was a concealed carrier. He used his firearm to stop a potential mass shooting from occurring. Probably one of the greatest ones that would have occurred in our country was the New Life Church in Colorado Springs, where a guy walked in with 1,000 rounds of ammunition strapped to him. He was intending on committing the greatest mass shooting on American soil, and thankfully one of the worshipers there had a concealed carry permit. She used it and she critically injured him. That ended the threat right there. Sadly, a lot of times what happens, these are very heroic efforts, and it's great to see these examples where these mass shootings are brought to a screeching halt, and yet typically the media doesn't talk about these nationwide.
The initial response to many of these shootings in recent years, it seems, you know, after Newtown, to be a shoulder shrug, you know, from many advocates of gun control. After their defeat in Congress, many of them turned to state legislatures where they were successful in many states, Maryland being one of them. But you know, initially in the days after this tragedy in Charleston, there was not a lot of lawmakers on Capitol Hill, Nancy Pelosi for one, who really focused on this issue of guns. Do you think that you're winning this debate? Is the lack of debate about this topic a sign that your side is winning?
Well, I think gun rights are advancing. I think we've tried gun control. You know, Einstein said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. And we've seen in this country it doesn't work. We've seen in other countries it doesn't work. The president did try after the Sandy Hook shooting to launch an effort for further gun restrictions. He failed. Even with the Democrat control of Congress, he wasn't able to jumpstart it there. I certainly don't think he's going to be effective now. And you mentioned the states. At the state level, on the one-year anniversary of the Sandy Hook shooting, actually there was greater freedoms, actually more states. There were a few that restricted gun rights, but there was even more freedom where states were making it easier for people to carry concealed firearms for their own protection.
Many of these advocates calling for, quote, common sense gun reforms, including Hillary Clinton in recent days, are at the very least calling for universal background checks. Do you oppose that?
Yes, we do.
Why?
Background checks, they're ineffective. They don't stop bad guys from getting guns. The police don't think they're effective, and they restrict and infringe constitutional rights. You know, the Second Amendment says that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And that is an infringement where you are requiring a law-abiding person to prove their innocence to the government before they can exercise a constitutionally protected right. It would be as if some media outlet libeled somebody, and then now we're going to punish all, like your network, punish everybody else because of what one media outlet did. So now we're going to screen your broadcasts, we're going to have waiting periods, background checks, screen them to make sure that that doesn't happen again. That's in essence what is being asked of gun owners. They're the ones being punished, but the overwhelming majority of gun owners use their firearms properly.
You used the phrase law-abiding citizen, and that was a point that Mr. Everett brought up yesterday, that Roof, the suspect in this shooting in Charleston, that there were a lot of red flags, numerous warning signs. He was banned from a local shopping mall because of odd behavior. He had he was under felony indictment for possession of drugs. He had a website that many of us have seen now where he was ranting some of his racial speech. And he somehow passed a background check.
Yet he still passed a background check.
But on paper, as Mr. Everett made the argument, he was a, quote, law-abiding citizen before this happened.
So then what's the alternative then? Are you talking about banning all guns and taking all guns because there could be that one bad apple? See, that's where that argument leads. Look, up in Sandy Hook, up in Connecticut, that guy, Adam Lanza, he evaded the background check. He probably couldn't have passed one, so he killed his first victim, stole her firearms, that was his mother, stole her firearms, and then shot up the school. A background check is not going to prevent the determined individual from getting firearms.
So you see the solution is guns, more guns.
That's what the police say, is law-abiding citizens. I agree with the police. Almost 90% of them agree the way you stop this is for the law-abiding to be able to protect themselves. Otherwise, they're just waiting on the phone, and a lot of people can die in 5, 10, 15 minutes.
You just quoted the insanity is doing the same thing over and over. I can hear your opponent saying adding more guns to this problem is not going to help.
But Roof was not, he was prevented by law from going into that church in South Carolina. In fact, all the worshipers there in that South Carolina church were prevented. So actually what I'm advocating is something different. What I'm advocating is let's do what they did at that Florida church. Let's do what they did at the New Life Church in Colorado Springs, where law-abiding citizens were able to stop the bad guy right there without waiting for the police.
Yes, more guns are not going to make people feel safer. This idea of feeling safe, that if we just have many more people on the streets wearing guns, concealed weapons, law-abiding citizens, that many people just simply are not comfortable. They weren't raised with guns. They don't go to firing ranges. They're just not comfortable with that. So maybe that's not the solution for everyone.
I guess the question is, do you want to feel safe or do you want to stay alive? There is no country that has shown that by banning firearms, they've made themselves safer. The former mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, said, I feel safer in New York City than I do in London. England has a much higher violence rate than we do here. And again, they haven't prevented their mass shootings, nor has many of the countries throughout Europe down into India as well. So that is a losing solution to say we're going to prevent everybody. We're going to make these gun-free zones. Guess what? Putting a sign up somewhere saying you can't have a gun in this zone doesn't stop an evil heart with evil intent, they laugh at that. In fact, like Ruth, they actually target those opportunities because while they may be evil, they're not dumb, and they want to be the only one with the gun.
Before you go, I just want to get your take on the 2016 field, because this is an issue that has come up. As I mentioned, Hillary Clinton tackled it, saying that there should be common sense gun reforms. What about on the Republican side? Are there any winners or losers or folks that you see as stronger advocates for the Second Amendment than others?
Well, I think on the Republican side, you see a lot of advocates who support the Second Amendment. On the Democrat side, you see advocates who want to restrict Second Amendment rights, who want to chop it up, tear it up. So that's basically your voting guide right there. Most of the Republicans are in strong support, and the Democrats are not. And that's probably what people need to remember when they go into the voting booth.
None of the contenders or potential contenders on the GOP side you're uncomfortable with?
None that, I mean, there are differences to varying degrees, but the ones who are really strong are like Scott Walker, Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, and there's some others too, but those ones are very strong on Second Amendment rights, and have, Scott Walker just signed legislation to repeal the waiting period in Wisconsin. Ted Cruz and Rand Paul are sponsoring and co-sponsoring legislation to regain and restore Second Amendment rights in the Senate. So those are certainly some of the leaders on the Second Amendment side.
Erich Pratt, Gun Owners of America, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
We're back with more News Talk in just